Well, happy Tuesday, Rare Leader community. Welcome back to another Rare Conversation. And join again this week with Dennis Hill, Daniela Jalen, and myself, Tony Jalen. So glad you're here. So this week's topic, we're going to be talking about how to get creative and adapt when your back is against the wall. And so you can join us each and every week here on Tuesdays at 12:01 p.m. to 12:31 p.m. to join us for a Rare Conversation where we talk about different subjects from leadership, from goal setting, time management, the whole gamut. And the whole mission of it is to empower you and equip you with the tools and resources and connections necessary to live your best life. So before we jump into today's discussion, if it's not on your calendar, please make sure it is on your calendar. We do have a little switch in schedule next week, 11:30 a.m. Join us on the Clubhouse app if you are on it. We will be joined by international best-selling author, almost 1 million copies sold of just one of his books, Bob Berg. And if you want to learn how to expand your network, not just at work, at home, and also in your nonprofits, make sure to join that conversation. That is something you're not going to want to miss. We're also going to be taking questions from the audience as well. So mark it on your calendars. That's the Rare Leaders Club on Clubhouse, and that's on Tuesday, April 13th. So in today's topic, again, it's about how to get creative and adapt when your back is against the wall. So we're going to cover 3 questions that can go ahead and tap into your creative juices a lot more, and talk about some different techniques to help release the creativity you know is inside of you. So Dennis and Neil, I think you both would agree that sometimes it takes courage to approach a challenge in a new way. And sometimes that means as well, you got to go against the crowd or overcome your own resistance. So creativity can find effective solutions. And so we're really going to be diving into that. How many of you guys have ever heard of writer's block as a writer? Yeah. And for those of you guys who are joining this live, welcome your comments in the comment section here as well. They talk about often, writer experiences writer's block from time to time. However, though, writers aren't the only people that encounter these mental blocks. You can be feeling stuck right now because of a challenge, with viable solutions really like escaping you. So we're gonna go through some questions. We're gonna have a Rare Leader conversation that can go ahead and tap into your creativity. So here's the first question for Dennis and Danielle, for those of you guys who are watching us live. What conditions help you to use your imagination?
What did you say? I got caught up on imagination.
What conditions help you to use your imagination? This is there's 3 of them. There's 3 self-reflection questions we're going to share with you all today. Yep. One is, what conditions help you to use your imagination?
Well, I think conditions that are unusual, one of a kind, or unprecedented, because you can't just utilize what you've already done in the past or react to just something autonomically or automatically. So imagination kicks in then, but imagination doesn't necessarily mean that it's an actual solution to your situation. But in general, it's triggered by unusual, unprecedented circumstances.
Right on. Danielle, how about you?
Conditions for me kind of falls under the category of like, am I mulling over something over and over again? Like, is it stressing me? Is it causing some kind of emotional imbalance of some sorts where it just keeps replaying? And so for me, like, to be able to get rid of that is like just to write it out and walk away from it, because if I keep it inside, I'm holding it and it's holding me back.
Right. You know, when I think about this question in terms of tapping into my creativity, the conditions that help me use my imagination is like twofold. If I'm working with a client, that's one condition. But for me, my back's against the wall, I can get ultra creative after I get through the injury portion of it. So it's interesting that when I think about that question. So here's the second question. What can you learn from one challenge that you've had that you responded to creatively? So what I'm curious about is name a time you had a challenge that you had to respond to creatively, and what did you learn from it?
I'm going to yield to Danielle on that one first.
Just because I'm thinking, right? A challenge. Well, I think I can relate this to my working out, because I had worked to qualify for the Boston Marathon a few years back and missed it by a minute 34 of the qualifying time. And so to learn from that experience, and I take that a lot into different things I do, is the discipline and the structure of a day that goes into a training. I think it can relate to any part of your life. Like if you have that structure and that discipline and that perseverance to continue through, it's easier to stay focused on the task, and just to learn from maybe there was something just a little bit off in that training that held me back. But learning and accepting and appreciating that, because had that been the Boston Marathon that I qualified for, I would have been running in the marathon that had the bombing. So not always taking the so-called failure of not reaching something, but what's the lesson and what can you be grateful out of that and moving forward.
Yeah, I remember when you were training for that, and I mean, you trained hard for it. And for those of you guys who are just joining us here, we're really talking about, how to get creative when your back is against the wall. And there's 3 questions. You can actually write these questions down. It will actually help get your creative juices flowing if you feel like you're blocked a little bit. But I remember, like, oh my gosh, you worked so hard to get it. But then, like you said, to know that you could have been crossing the finish line at that moment when the bombs went off. And what was interesting about it, though, is that how you responded later and then qualified that next year, and you beat it by a couple minutes, didn't you, for your qualifier?
Yep. Over 5 minutes.
Yeah, over 5 minutes. So, that's a big deal. But you responded creatively to that challenge, and you learned from it. Dennis, how about you? What's one thing you can learn from a challenge that you've had that you had to respond to creatively?
Well, I tend not to operate on automatic at any moment of the day or night. So pretty much every one of my responses, regardless of the circumstances, is a creative response. I know that sounds a little weird, but life of a polymath. But the issue really is where was I challenged, right?
Yeah. So what's a challenge you had that you learned? Like, what can you learn from a challenge that you respond to creatively to? That it wasn't like,
I don't go to a playbook for anything.
right.
That's the problem. So the day is full of challenges. One this morning was trying to deal with a breakdown in communications among critical staff members. And so we came up with a procedure to ensure that they will communicate as a matter of process now every time they have a deployment of software to do, every time. And that will take us about 20 to 30 minutes every time there's a deployment, but it's costing us hours in diagnostics and rework to not do that formal process. And I've allowed that go on just so long and years, in fact, and I've hoped that it would self-correct. It hasn't. And so we put this process in, which is about 15 steps, came up with it on the fly, went through it interactively this morning, and there it is. So we should no longer have breakdowns in critical among the critical members of the team when we deploy new software.
That's great. And that's, both of those are great examples of, learning from a challenge.
An interesting point I want to add is the self-correcting, right? I believe that people who are professionals should be capable of self-correcting, right? Don't require management intervention. However, this process, if it's done right, will reveal the impact of their updates on other aspects of the system that are now broken because of that, which means that to do this process is to invite more work unto themselves, which is why they would have never self-corrected, because nobody really volunteers for a routine task that is going to create more work for them. They want to do stuff that's going to create less work for them.
Right.
So I get it.
Yeah.
I had to be creative.
As a leader, though, that's important to realize, because creating space for people to creatively work through a challenge. Like, there's nothing really brand new to any of this, but sometimes we get a chance to talk it out. It's like, oh, I just thought of that. Like, why didn't I think about that years ago?
Right.
So here's the third reflection question in terms of how to really get creative and adapt when your back is against the wall. Because this is a muscle. Creativity is a muscle. You got to work it. So how can you train yourself to think creatively? For those of you guys who are watching us live, feel free to go ahead and put your comments in the section there as well. If you're watching this later. But how can you train yourself to think creatively?
I have a quick answer for that, and then Danielle can jump in as she's thinking. Just engage in a continuous process of improvement, constantly. Therefore, you're going to ask as a natural question in that process, what can I do differently and do it better? Okay, you don't have to be reactive, especially as a leader. So continuous process improvement is what I would call continuous engagement improvement, continuously asking yourself, what do I do to make this better? Even if you think it's the best you've ever done, ask. There's no harm in asking. There's a lot of harm in ignoring it.
Yeah. There's a lot of harm in ignoring it. Danielle?
I think a lot of times as you are trying to create, whether you're creating for a client or you're creating for yourself, there's like part that kind of gets stuck, and it's really recognizing and becoming self-aware what that looks like for you, and realizing that the analytical side of your brain is one side and your creative side ends up being the other, and how you can find some kind of activity that triggers and helps that creative side, whether it's to just walk away, change of scenery, whether it's a walk to the bathroom, whether you have to walk to your car, but just to how you can become more self-aware when those situations are coming up and you look like you're going to get stuck or you are stuck, how to recognize it quicker, and then take those steps that you need. And I think that's a huge part of being able to train yourself to think creatively.
It's interesting you said that. It's in terms of being aware when you're getting stuck, and then having tools in your tool belt, so be your resources. How to, okay, I'm getting stuck right now. I need to go do this. Get away from situation. Like, how many of you guys watching have ever had the situation where you feel completely stuck, then you walked away from the situation, and then came back all refreshed and renewed? It's like, okay, now I got it. So is that what you're trying to reference, Danielle, on that? Or
Yeah,
I
think it's one of those things like when you're like, oh, what's that person's name? What's that person's name? What's that person's name? And a day later, you're like, oh, just out of the blue, it pops in your head because you took yourself out of the situation. You stopped focusing so hardly on it. And I think it's being able to recognize like those situations where you're focusing so hard that it's actually creating that block.
Yeah.
And then being able to just walk away and it'll come back when it's time.
Mhm.
I had stepped out for a minute. What's the question?
The question is, I mean, we talked about how can I train myself to think creatively?
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay, well, like I said, continuous engagement, but Danielle brought up block again, right?
Mhm.
I'll give you another technique. I never recommend that our staff, anybody works on one thing a day. Think of the person sitting at that slot machine in a casino. Just one more pull, one more pull, one more pull, and the big hit never comes, right? Why don't you get up and try another machine? Why don't you get up and try a different game, right? Same thing here. We schedule 4 out of 8 hours a day. The other 4 hours are taken care of by incoming questions or whatever's by, somehow it always gets filled. But if you're working on one project and you're focused on just one project, or even worse yet, one task in one project, right? You get myopic. That doesn't stimulate the creative side. You need to change subject matter. Danielle said it. You walk away, get a different change of perspective, a different venue. You can do that mentally too by not necessarily multitasking. You can still single task, just jump to another project or task for the day and spend a little bit more time, because somehow, at least what I found experientially, not just for myself, but among other people, is when they start working on this other thing, oh boy, something triggers over here on the first thing that you wouldn't have ever thought of if you didn't have that change of venue, that change of perspective. So
Well,
think on more than one topic for the day. Stop pulling the one arm slot machine, switch machine.
well, when the flow is stopped, right, when you're not winning, change machines, you know?
Yeah, but that's the problem with gambling addiction, right? They don't. They stay there hoping it's just one more pull, one more pull, one more pull. It's the same thing in business practice. It's just give me a little bit longer, a little bit longer, a little bit longer. Before you know it, they burned up hours, maybe even days. I know somebody who burned up weeks. And yet every morning in their meeting, they would report on the fact that they were working on other things, but they weren't. They just didn't want to report it because they were pulling the one-armed bandit.
Well, let's talk about some, I mean, we talked about 3 self-reflection questions, just, especially when your back is against the wall, you're just stuck. But here are some techniques that I've learned, and, we shared already a few of them, is go for a run, like go outside. Get your adrenaline pumping. How many times have you gone for a walk, did a workout, and had clarity in terms of whatever project you're working on? I just did it this morning. I was on a phone call and I was sitting at my desk and I literally decided, I'm gonna take this phone call and we're gonna walk. That's why you always invest in a good headset. What do you guys think about this time technique? Freestyle. I wrote this out, if you obstruct your creative process by being too rigid or expecting too much too soon, you'll send your creative juices into a hideout indefinitely. So what do you guys think about that? To just freestyle sometimes a subject, coming from a different perspective. Danielle?
I think it's if you are able to start to change your perspective and think about another point of view, that it's easier to just, I mean, if you're writing or you're typing or whatever it is, just like to get it out and then to like ask yourself a question like to see from a different point of view and then start writing about that. And I think that helps trigger both sides of your brain, enabling you to see a different perspective or different things that can help contribute to what you're originally working on.
One of the biggest mistakes leaders make, and people in general, and it's not done late in life, it's done early in life for leaders because leaders figure this out and overcome it. They assume people see things the same way they do. So they don't take the time necessarily to impart their knowledge or their understanding, or they take time, right? But one of the things we can do, again, I'm piggybacking on what Danielle said, difference of perspective. When you think you've made yourself clear, step back and present it from the viewpoint of the people you're speaking or leading. Say, would they appreciate what I'm saying? Lawyers do this as a matter of training because they're set up to function adversarially, right? That's the basis of law, dispute, adversary, that's right. But the better lawyers are the ones who can see both sides of the issue, arming themselves for their arguments, disarming the arguments on the other side. Again, that's not a negative, that's a positive, because I want to embrace and involve and include and have a variety of opinions and perspectives. But the mistake we make is that everybody sees it the same way we do. We have to step away from that, step back and put yourselves in that other position.
You know, in terms of taking a step back and going from a different perspective, one of the other techniques to use to get the creative juices flowing and to become more adaptive is seek inspiration.
Yeah, well, you've got that, right? We talk to Tony every week, and I am so inspired by those episodes, although he does make me sweat at times because he's a challenge. But here's the interesting thing. Your discussion today is, how are you creative when your back is against the wall? Break the wall down.
Mm-hmm.
Keep breaking it down, right? And don't allow that wall to impede you. So, and that's a lot like you're saying. So what's going to do that? You know, not a defeated attitude, but an inspired one. Exactly what you're saying.
Stephen King was asked in front of a whole auditorium, so you've written all these books, Stephen. How do you break through writer's block? And this is what he did. Pretend this is a pencil. He has a little table sitting next to him with his water on it. He picks up the pencil. He goes like this. He goes, I start writing about something different. He goes, you just break through. You just pick it up. You just go. You know, and that's when I look at seeking inspiration, I love now reading autobiographies more often. If you've not read the book Shoe Dog, that's Phil Knight's memoir, the founder of Nike, it's just amazing to think about how they had to be creative. I'm talking like when they have a like $500,000 purchase order and they don't have the money in the bank and they got to pay the purchase order. I mean, you got to focus on the solution versus the problem. Here's another thing is change your scenery. Your office actually may be the cause of your creative block. How many of you guys have ever gone to a coffee shop and been more creative? Right? You know, those of you guys watching. Go to a park, go to a bookstore. I found that there's a pond down from the office here. I'm excited because I can actually fish there too. So Danielle, if you ever see me grab a fishing pole, you know what I'm gonna do in the midday. Here's another one. How about this one? Releasing your inhibitions. Many times the fear of failure is the only barrier between you and success. I don't know about you guys, but I've never seen worry work. So everything becomes more difficult during times of stress. Like each and every one of us will have one stressful type moment or a moment that almost might emotionally hijack us during the week. It'll happen. Maybe sometimes multiple of them. But here's what you need to do today. And this is my challenge. I'm going to ask Danielle and Dennis this little thing right now. I want to challenge everyone to build this creative muscle. Do something creative and out of the ordinary today. So grab a piece of paper and write down one thing that is creative and out of the ordinary of what you would normally do in a day. It could be listening to a new genre of music. It could be writing a little short story. You might want to learn how to write a haiku. write down something right now. And if you guys are watching during live Facebook right now, write it in the comments. So Dennis, what's one thing, you got it written down?
No, go to Danielle first, please.
Okay. Danielle, he's volunteering you.
Volunteering me. One thing out of the ordinary today that I've not been doing is I will go take the dogs for a walk, which I think they would much appreciate after only being running around in the yard. Just getting out because it's nice out and going for a walk.
All right. Something different and creative. I like it. Okay. Dennis?
Oh, every day is a creative and special day. Honestly, I'm going to speak candidly at this point and tell you that the thought had crossed my mind as I was walking outside this morning of doing a fast. Yeah. Fasting and prayer is something we're encouraged to do in our spiritual walk. But I have been confronted over the last several weeks by a number of challenges. People, a 22-year-old young man with cancer, terminal cancer, a woman who's been fighting ovarian cancer and decided yesterday that the fight is done and she's going to go into hospice. Just remarkable people doing remarkable things. And, you know, I struggle with God's plan in all of this. And I don't mean to get terribly personal, but I want to tell you, it's a challenge. I can't deal with it through the mechanisms I have. And I'm being creative by turning to something that yours truly does not do. I don't fast. And I thought, what do I have to lose but fast?
Fantastic. Fantastic. So those of you guys who are watching, what's the one thing that's outside the norm that you're going to do? Creativity is like a muscle. You got to work it. So we're going to go ahead and do some final thoughts here over the next 2 minutes here. And we'll start out with Dennis and then Danielle, then I'll finish this up. All right, Dennis.
I would encourage people to take seriously the idea that most things we encounter in our lives can be resolved in 20 minutes or less. And that when you find yourself against that wall and you find yourself out of ideas, give yourself 20 minutes and then go call a friend, talk to a colleague, talk to somebody. Give yourselves another 20 minutes. And when you can't, after 40 minutes, resolve that, then go and talk to the boss. Because the leadership or the headship of the organization is there because of the experience and insight they have. And I have to tell you, they may not have the answer, but they may have the process to trigger you towards the answer.
Well said. Well said. Thank you, Dennis. Danielle?
I was on the same track with Dennis there on if you are stuck and you feel like there's no other place to turn, is turn to somebody. Ask for that help. It's time then to put the ego aside and to recognize like just having a conversation and maybe getting the words out of your head and having that conversation will trigger something for you, will help answer your own questions that you've been having. And then also they may have just one little question that they ask you that could be that turning point that you needed. So always just seek somebody out that you can ask for help.
Awesome. Indeed. And I'll leave you all with a quote from Maya Angelou. She said, "You can't use up creativity. The more you use, the more you have." Connect, collaborate, contribute, rise up, rare leaders. Until next time, I'm Tony Jalen, Dennis Hill, and Danielle Jalen. Talk to y'all later.